Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we try to cut through the noise and bring you the essential insights from some pretty complex ideas.
That's the goal.
Today, we're diving deep into a world that's often overlooked, but honestly is utterly crucial: public and civil services values.
It really underpins so much.
We've sifted through a whole stack of fascinating sources, real-world examples, some history, modern dilemmas, all that stuff.
Yeah, a really interesting mix.
And it's all to help you understand how these fundamental values truly shape everything, from the quiet corridors of government
to the busy boardrooms of corporations. It connects.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So our mission today is to pull out those vital nuggets of knowledge. We want you to walk away feeling genuinely well-informed.
Maybe with a few surprising facts.
Hopefully. And maybe a few aha moments that connect these kind of big ideas directly to your everyday life.
What's truly fascinating, I think, is realizing how deeply these values are just intertwined with how society functions, often in ways we don't even notice.
Until something goes wrong, yeah. Okay, so let's unpack a concept that's fundamental to, well, everything we'll discuss today. Accountability.
Good place to start.
At its simplest, it's basically about being answerable for performing a task.
Yeah.
Think about it like this. If you sign up for a course, and it doesn't meet your expectations,
Yeah.
the instructor is essentially accountable to you.
And that same idea translates directly into the public sphere. We found this really vivid example in our research.
Oh, yeah.
Imagine a civil servant in Delhi tasked with water distribution on a really scorching day, like say June 11th, when temperatures were hitting record highs. Reliable water isn't just a convenience, is it?
No, it's a lifeline. Absolutely.
So if the quality or the quantity or even just the timely delivery of that water isn't ensured, that civil servant can and really should be held accountable.
Okay, but here's where it gets really interesting and often, I think, incredibly difficult to actually put into practice.
Right.
For accountability to genuinely work, three things have to be crystal clear.
Yeah.
We need to know who is accountable,
Okay.
to whom they are accountable,
To who?
and for what specific things, like is it quality,
Yeah.
timeliness, maybe financial efficiency?
Got it. The specifics matter.
Hugely.
Yeah.
Without that clarity, maybe spelled out in something like a citizen charter, you, the citizen, wouldn't even know where to start if you had a complaint, right?
You wouldn't know who to talk to. Yeah, that hidden complexity is a major point.
It really is.
So this immediately brings up the question, in this huge landscape of public service, who actually answers to whom? We often default to thinking of it top-down.
Yeah, that's the usual way.
And that's what we call upward accountability, where a lower authority answers to a higher one, an employee to their boss.
Or, as the sources mentioned, citizens to the government for following traffic rules, that kind of thing.
Exactly. It's the most common, the most visible form.
But let's flip that perspective. Let's talk downward accountability.
Okay.
This is about holding those higher up accountable to those below them. Or, more broadly, the government accountable to you, the citizen.
Which happens through elections, of course.
Every 5 years, yeah. But also through other really powerful tools like social audits, direct citizen feedback, citizen report cards.
We've seen that work, haven't we? With protests against certain laws.
Definitely. Like the Broadcasting Bill, Advocates Bill, or those farm bills in India, public pressure forced changes.
And a prime example, really empowering the individual, is the Right to Information Act, the RTI Act in India.
Been around 20 years now, right?
That's right. It's a critical tool for social accountability. It gives you the right to know, the right to correct information.
And there are ways to appeal if they don't give you the info.
Yes, clear mechanisms for appeal. But, it's not perfect. Our sources point out problems.
Like what?
Well, rejections happen. Sometimes they cite reasons like not of public interest or trade secrets, national security.
How'd you go? Those make some sense.
But also, interestingly, personal data under newer data protection laws. Section 44, subclause 3 of the Digital Personal Data Protection Act is mentioned. So it's got hurdles.
Okay, so we've got upward, downward. What else?
Shifting sideways, you have horizontal accountability.
Sideways.
Yeah, think checks and balances between entities at the same kind of level. Our sources mention the Controller and Auditor General, the CAG, in India.
Right, they audit government spending.
Exactly. Or a more modern example, like the Ayushman Bharat health scheme in India. You've got insurance companies and hospital committees kind of overseeing each other, ensuring quality, preventing fraud within the system.
Okay, checks and balances at the same level. Got it.
Then there's diagonal accountability. This is where civil society, NGOs, media try to hold the government accountable.
That feels vital for democracy.
It absolutely is.
Okay.
And again, challenges. Our sources mention laws like the FCRA Act in India, which restricts foreign funding for NGOs that can really impact their work.
Limits their independence, maybe?
Potentially, yeah. And they also point to issues like cross-media ownership and India's, well, lower ranking in the Media Freedom Index from Reporters Without Borders.
So the media is struggling in that watchdog role.
The sources suggest they face significant hurdles, yeah.
Okay. And finally,
social accountability. And this maybe best captures the spirit of what we're talking about. It stresses that public services should be monitored by all civic stakeholders.
so citizens, NGOs, pressure groups, everyone.
Everyone. It's about your active participation as a watchdog, upholding not just your rights, but also, importantly, your civic duties.
Is there a good example of this?
A really compelling one is India's NGN Regi A scheme, that huge rural employment program. It's known for its social audits, where communities actually review the spending and the impact.
That sounds powerful.
It is. But there was a recent shift to using a digital ID system, Aadhaar, for payments. And that led to over 80 lakh, that's 8 million job cards being deleted.
Oh, wow.
It shows how bureaucratic processes, even if maybe well-intentioned for efficiency, can accidentally exclude vulnerable people and hinder the service.
So good intentions, bad outcome.
Sometimes, yeah. And then on the flip side, a really stark example of what you might call negative accountability. That recent, very high-profile Pune Porsche case in India, our sources discuss it. A wealthy juvenile involved in a fatal accident
I remember hearing about that.
received surprisingly lenient bail, including apparently being asked to write a 300-word essay.
Seriously.
An essay.
That's what the sources say. It just ignited this huge public debate, really highlighted this troubling dynamic of sort of rule of law versus law of rule. Meaning where influence or status seems to override impartial justice. It just underscores how fragile accountability can be when powerful interests are involved.
And why public vigilance is so important.
Absolutely essential.
Okay, so pulling back from all these different types of accountability, what does this mean for the bigger picture, for governance?
Well, first, it's crucial to get this distinction. Governance is not the same as government.
Right. Government is the institution, the entity, the people, the laws, yeah. Governance is the process. It's how all the different stakeholders, government, civil society, NGOs, vulnerable groups, even corporations, how they all articulate their interests, exercise their rights, and sort of mediate their differences.
So it's the how, not just the who.
Exactly. And that broad definition is powerful. It lets us apply the idea to different areas: political governance, corporate governance, nonprofit, even international governance.
The players change, but the process is similar.
The stakeholders change, but the underlying process of making decisions and balancing interests, that stays consistent. That adaptability is really key.
Okay, so moving into the digital age, e-governance.
Right. Simply put, using technology for service delivery and, importantly, two-way interaction between government and citizens.
And the benefits seem pretty obvious, right? Transparency, efficiency.
Huge benefits. It dramatically improves access, reaching the last person without needing them to physically travel. Think of centralized digital pension systems or faceless tax assessments in India.
Saves time, saves hassle.
Definitely. Boosts citizen participation, government responsiveness. A great example is those chip-enabled biometric e-passports. They streamline immigration, improve security globally.
So tech making things smoother.
Ultimately, yeah, e-governance can really uphold the rule of law. It can encourage bureaucrats to shift focus from being stuck in, paper files to focusing on life, the actual impact on people.
But there's always a but. Ethical considerations.
Big ones. Privacy breaches are a major concern. We've seen leaks from digital ID systems like Aadhaar or new restrictions on public access to personal info under data protection laws.
The digital divide, too, presumably.
Yeah.
Not everyone's online or tech savvy.
Exactly. That can lead to exclusion, hindering people's ability to engage with online services, even something fundamental like filing an RTI request online.
And systems are vulnerable, right? Cyber attacks.
Hugely vulnerable. Ransomware attacks on electricity boards, major outages hitting hospitals, airports. It happens.
Okay, here's something subtle you touched on earlier. Diffused accountability. Can you unpack that a bit more in the eGov context?
Yeah, it's tricky. While e-governance might make it clear who is initially assigned a task digitally.
Like it logs who got the file.
Right. But the ease of digitally transferring that task across a complex chain, maybe multiple departments, it can actually make it harder to pinpoint who is truly responsible if an error occurs down the line.
So the digital trail gets messy.
It can become so convoluted, yeah. So if you're trying to get an online problem fixed, it can be incredibly frustrating just finding the right person or department who actually needs to fix it.
That sounds familiar.
And there's also this potential for, well, our sources call it science without humanity, where the human touch, the empathy might get lost when interactions become purely system-based. Is that drive for efficiency always worth losing the human element? It's a real question.
A balancing act.
Yeah.
Which brings us naturally to ethical governance.
Right, which is simply governance done according to the highest foundational values: integrity, honesty, objectivity, selflessness.
The core principles.
Exactly. And it requires everyone in the chain, from top civil servants right down to individual citizens, to embrace these principles. Think of Nolan's 7 principles of public life.
Selflessness, integrity, objectivity.
Those ones.
Those are the ones, widely recognized guidelines. Or consider that example from our sources, a bureaucrat going beyond duty, sometimes called supererogation.
Going the extra mile.
Yeah, to personally help an old lady navigate a complex system. That's ethical governance in action, prioritizing the human need over just sticking rigidly to the letter of the law.
So if we want to strengthen these values in governance, how do we do it? It sounds like a big task.
It's definitely a holistic thing. It draws from different ethical ideas, from deontology, understanding your moral duty.
Doing the right thing because it's right.
Precisely. From cultivating a positive attitude in public servants, developing emotional intelligence for empathy and responsiveness, and crucially, building on those core values, like accountability itself.
What about practical steps? Things like having and adhering to a strong code of ethics or conduct, robustly protecting whistleblowers.
That's a big one.
Crucial. Genuinely engaging stakeholders, which, as we said, boosts social accountability, leading by example. Comprehensive training, not just one-off stuff. And promoting what's called holistic competence.
Meaning more than just job skills.
Exactly. Going beyond just professional expertise to include ethical reasoning, empathy, the whole package. Our sources mention things like the proposed public service bill in India.
Proposed but not enacted.
Right, not enacted. But it aimed to formally embed values like patriotism, national pride, allegiance to the Constitution, showing how you can try to weave core national values into the fabric of civil service.
It really seems to boil down to that quote you mentioned.
Yeah, that ethical framework of governance shall be embedded in fabric of integrity, honesty, selfless devotion to service, constantly striving to achieve ethical and moral standards. That captures it pretty well.
Okay, let's zoom out now. Go global. International relations ethics. This feels highly relevant today.
It's extremely relevant, yeah. Constantly in the news. Let's take counterterrorism ethics, looking at it through the lens of India's actions, for instance.
What are the ethical lines there?
Well, our sources stress the importance of using proportionate force, protecting civil liberties avoiding torture, not targeting civilians, clearly differentiating combatants from non-combatants.
Even if the other side doesn't.
Especially then, ethically speaking, and refraining from racial profiling, even if you face it yourself. These are hard lines to hold sometimes.
I can imagine. What about the really big weapons? WMDs, nukes?
Weapons of mass destruction and nuclear weapons ethics. Incredibly challenging. Key issues are balancing deterrence with moral restraint.
The idea that having them prevents war, but using them is unthinkable.
That's the paradox. The absolute necessity of civilian protection, global non-proliferation efforts, and critically avoiding accidental escalation.
Miscalculate.
Exactly. There was even a past conspiracy theory mentioned about a nuclear site during India-Pakistan tensions. It just shows how high the risk of miscalculation is. And of course, the devastating environmental impact and the consequences for future generations if they were ever used.
It's terrifying to contemplate. And now we have drones everywhere, too.
Right, drone ethics. A fascinating, fast-moving area. Drones have amazing positive uses, delivering aid, mapping disaster zones, environmental surveillance.
But the downsides?
Huge downsides. They can be terrifying tools for international security threats, cross-border smuggling, targeted attacks. We see that tragically in Ukraine and Russia, or reports of intended attacks on sensitive sites. It's the ultimate dual-use tech problem.
Good and bad uses baked into the same technology.
Precisely. And finally, under this global umbrella, climate justice.
This feels like one of the defining ethical issues of our time.
Absolutely. It demands intergenerational responsibility thinking about the future. Global equity in emissions, which means acknowledging the historical pollution from Western nations.
The idea of common but differentiated responsibilities.
Exactly. Tackling climate-induced displacement and the resulting refugee crises, and ensuring reparations for communities that are hit hardest, plus protecting indigenous rights. It all ties back to global interdependence.
So if we look at international relations more broadly, what are the key ethical frameworks people use?
Well, there's international ethics itself, just the basic ideas of fairness, justice, respect between nations. Then you often see this tension between realism.
Countries acting purely in their self-interest.
Pretty much. Policies like America First or, nations funding others even when they know it might have negative consequences. Those are often seen as realist approaches.
And the alternative.
Idealism, which tries to pursue common interests, dialogue, cooperation. Though idealism can be really challenging when you're dealing with actors like terrorist groups, for example.
It's hard to find common ground there.
Very difficult. Then there's constructivism. This focuses on how countries build trust and shared understanding through actions, like India's Vaccine Maitri initiative during COVID.
Sharing vaccines globally.
Yeah, or supporting the African Union joining the G20. These are actions that build relationships and shared norms. And underpinning a lot of this, particularly from an Indian perspective, is the philosophy of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam.
The world is one family.
That profound idea. It offers a real foundation for global cooperation. These concepts help us analyze ethical issues in areas like international aid.
Which can be misused.
Unfortunately, yes. Our sources note it can sometimes fuel corruption, inadvertently support human rights abuses, or even degrade the environment in the places it's meant to help.
That leads us to a really tough applied case. The refugee crisis.
A stark ethical dilemma. Should refugees be turned back to countries where they face persecution?
What do the ethics say?
Our sources argue pretty clearly. If a democratic, open society does that, it violates its own core principles. We, the people, social ethics, even concepts like the Sufi idea of oneness of being, wadat al-wujud.
The idea that all existence is connected.
Right. And fundamentally, it undermines basic human rights like life and liberty. This is where the principle of non-refoulement becomes absolutely critical.
Meaning you can't force people back into danger.
Exactly. We saw this become a huge issue in the Rohingya crisis, with people fleeing violence in Myanmar. It's a moral line.
Okay, let's shift focus from the global stage to the boardroom. Corporate governance.
Right. This defines how the corporate world manages the interests of its various stakeholders. Historically, the main driver was pure shareholder interest.
Just maximizing profit for investors.
That was the traditional view. But the big insight now, the powerful shift, is towards a much broader stakeholder-driven approach.
So, considering more than just the shareholders.
Definitely. Considering employees' fair pay, acknowledging their contribution, considering society embracing corporate social responsibility, CSR, business ethics, this idea of ethical capitalism.
And the nation itself.
And the nation. Aligning the company's natural drive for profit, its will to power, so to speak, with the national interest, guided by rationality and moral duty.
So what are the goals of good corporate governance?
Transparency, number one. Preventing fraud. Think of past scandals like Sachem Computers, or more recent controversies around companies like Byju's or Blue Star Cabs.
Maintaining trust, basically.
Exactly. Maintaining market and investor confidence and fostering economic growth that's built on trust. But ethical issues definitely persist.
Like what?
Related party transactions. This is a fascinating gray area, often ethics versus law.
How so?
It's not always illegal tax evasion, but it's an ethical concern when, say, companies pay very high salaries to family members who are technically employees. This can legally reduce the company's corporate tax bill.
So it saves them money legitimately.
But it's ethically questionable because it might divert funds that could otherwise be reinvested, shared more broadly, or benefit other stakeholders.
Ah, I see the dilemma. What else?
Insider trading, obviously. Using privileged info like knowing about a big tax order before it's public for personal profit.
Definitely unethical.
Absolutely. Then there's the lack of board independence. If a company's board is just packed with family members or close allies instead of genuinely independent directors.
It compromises oversight.
Hugely. Reduces transparency, makes it harder to expose wrongdoing. And finally, the issue of a corruption nexus collusion between companies and government officials or among companies to hide unethical stuff.
So what's the solution?
The solution, highlighted again and again in the sources, is genuinely practicing corporate social responsibility, CSR, moving beyond profit maximization.
And that's actually law in India now.
It is, under the Companies Act, Section 135. It mandates certain levels of corporate spending on social good. CSR helps ensure ethical capitalism, promotes sustainability, improves transparency, fosters social justice, and frankly, really boosts a company's reputation. Look at companies like Tata or Infosys known for it.
Okay, let's tackle another big applied ethics issue: economic inequality.
Yeah, this touches everyone. Our sources frame it as inherently negative, ethically speaking, with really far-reaching consequences.
How is it an ethical issue, specifically?
Well, ethically, it can reflect a society overly driven by pure individualism, potentially breaching social ethics and that oneness of being idea we mentioned. It also clearly shows where companies might be failing in their CSR, their duty to society beyond just shareholders.
And it intersects with other problems.
Deeply. With racial and gender disparities, leading to what the sources call the genderization of inequality.
Like the gender pay gap, the glass ceiling.
Exactly those things.
Yeah.
And it also ties into environmental injustice. Marginalized communities often suffer disproportionately from pollution and climate change impacts.
So the poorest often live in the most polluted areas.
Frequently, yes. So what are the solutions? Addressing systemic discrimination, promoting fair labor practices, responsible business, that ethical capitalism again, fostering real CSR, advocating for environmental justice, encouraging global cooperation, and crucially, adopting a bottom-up approach to governance.
Starting with people's actual needs.
Exactly. Building solutions from the ground up.
Okay, to bring all these different threads, accountability, governance, ethics, global issues, corporate issues together, let's look at a case study. This sounds like a tough one.
It really puts you in the hot seat. Imagine you are an officer heading an environmental pollution control board. Your job is ensuring industries comply with the rules.
Okay, got it.
You discover that many small and medium industries in your area, crucial employers, especially for migrant workers, are heavily polluting the air, the water, the soil, and it's causing serious health problems for local residents.
Right, a clear violation, so you issue notices.
You issue notices demanding they get fresh environmental clearance, basically clean up their act, and immediately you face intense backlash.
Remote.
Hostile industry owners, terrified of the cost, potential shutdowns, product shortages, workers and labor unions fearing job losses, livelihood insecurity, even powerful politicians with vested interest jumping in.
Wow, pressure from all sides.
Absolutely. A classic ethical pressure cooker. Maybe some colleagues, some local NGOs support stricter enforcement, but you are caught right in the middle between upholding the rule of law and the immediate, very real social and economic fallout for potentially thousands of people.
Okay, so what are my options? This feels impossible.
Well, let's break them down. Option 1, yield to the pressure.
Yes.
You stop the enforcement drive, short-term peace is restored, jobs are secure for now, but the ethical cost.
Huge. Compromising my integrity, environmental ethics, public health, basic justice for the people getting sick.
Exactly. Not really a sustainable solution, ethically.
Okay, option 2.
Strict enforcement. You push ahead rigidly, expose all the wrongdoing, maybe shut down the non-compliant industries immediately.
Uphold the law uncompromisingly.
Yes. But what's the risk here? Ignoring the economic sustainability of these businesses, the livelihoods of potentially thousands of workers, it could come across as purely bureaucratic, maybe even cold, rather than, democratic or people-focused.
Right, the human cost again, just in a different way. Is there a third way?
Option 3, the middle path, or what Aristotle might call the golden mean. This is generally what the sources recommend.
Okay, what does that look like?
It starts with immediately engaging all the stakeholders. Owners, workers, NGOs, politicians, the affected residents. Get everyone talking.
Difficult conversations, presumably.
No doubt. You could maybe initiate an independent inquiry to figure out who was responsible for the past breaches, pin down accountability. But the ultimate goal isn't just punishment.
It's finding solutions.
Finding practical solutions, especially for the workers, maybe retraining, reemployment in industries that are compliant or in government projects. You'd apply appropriate fines or penalties to the companies, certainly.
Make them pay for the damage.
But maybe outright closure is the absolute last resort, reserved only for the most polluting, unwilling to change offenders.
Trying to balance everything.
Trying to find that balance. And beyond the immediate crisis, you'd need robust mechanisms for the future. Regular monitoring, maybe using those e-governance tools for transparency. applying fines and penalties consistently as a deterrent. Critically, helping build the capacity of industries to comply, maybe technical assistance, fostering collaborative approaches, maybe even providing incentives for environmental responsibility.
So not just stick, but also carrot.
Exactly. Now think about the ethical dilemmas you face in that chair. It's intense.
Yeah, environment versus economic interest, obviously.
Right. Closure versus heavy fines.
Prioritizing worker welfare versus strict compliance.
Upholding the rule of law when everyone's screaming at you.
Ensuring transparency in my decisions.
And avoiding any conflict of interest, nepotism, favoritism. It's a minefield.
It really is. So as we wrap up this deep dive, it feels incredibly clear that these values we've been talking about, accountability, integrity, fairness, cooperation, they aren't just abstract ideas.
Not at all. They're deeply intertwined with how effectively and how ethically governance works at every single level of our lives.
So the final thought for you, listening. What does all this mean? In a world facing such complex challenges, how deeply are you willing to dive into the ethical side of the systems that govern all our lives?
And maybe more importantly, what role do you play or could you play in shaping them for the better?
Lots to think about. Keep exploring, keep asking questions, keep making those connections. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.